Welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're on part 7 of our Snow White doll project, and in this video we're going to be making her some cute shoes. So let's get started. First of all, we're going to be using these molds that I made in a previous video, and I do have a complete series on making shoes, how to do the inner, outer soles, etc. And so won't go into super detail here, but basically what we're going to do is use some polymer clay to make the sole of the shoe. That'll be the hard part. And that's going to have this heel, which I sort of twisted this uh, clay down into a thinner piece so I could smush it down into the heel portion and make sure that it gets all the way down in there. Then I place it down in here and pack it down, and then I can use my cutting tool to sort of cut off that top part that's bulging out. This will be, doesn't have to be exactly perfect because we can sand this and trim it some with the X-Acto knife, but I do like to try to get the inner part there sort of smooth because that would be harder to get to and makes it just look a little bit nicer. It's not super easy to sand. It's not horrible, but it takes a lot of time. So after we bake those for 30 minutes, pull those out. And as you can see, they're a little bit rough. We're going to have to trim some, but we can do that. These edges we can trim with the X-Acto knife. And once we get it fairly level on the surface, we can sand it. And trimming with the X-Acto, you want to be really careful because you can get started and then take off a whole lot more than you want. So do little tiny pieces at a time. And also you'll find these little places like this where there's an air hole. And I want to fix that before I complete these shoes. So what I'm going to do is rebake it with a little bit of clay in there. And to do that, you're going to need some liquid Sculpey. So I had started doing this and I said, nah, I got to fix this. So pull out the liquid Sculpey, and what this does is it binds two pieces of clay together really, really well. If you just stuck the clay down and baked it, there's a chance it could come out. So I just put a little dab of that down in there in the hole, and then take a small piece of clay and press it down in there. And then when we bake it, it will be just as if it was one piece of clay, and there won't be a chance that it will pop out. And I did try to smooth it a little bit, and then I'm just going to rebake it for about 15 minutes because we're only worried about baking that very thin piece. And meanwhile, we're going to be working on this other shoe and continue trimming off these rough edges, anything that's sticking out and easy to get rid of. You can carve down the heels a little bit if you need to, and then we'll be using basically it's fingernail filing sponges, and uh, these are really nice because they're soft and they conform to the shape that you're sanding, so they work really well on polymer clay. And I have one here that has a coarse side and a fine side. So once you get the shape part down, then you can sand it with the smoother side and it comes out looking pretty nice like this, where it's pretty smooth. And you can spend as much time on this as you want, but you want to make sure that you support the shoe because that clay can break in the thin places. Now I'm going to be making the inner sole, and to do this I'm just using cardstock. It's just like a note card, and I traced this around the foot and got a piece a whole lot larger than the shoe. So, and that's okay because we can always cut it down. So now I'm going to trace around this. You just want this to come right to the very edge, not overlap, because you're going to have fabric on top of this in addition to the card, and it'll make it even wider. So you want to, keep measuring this until you get it to where you want it to be so that it's just inside the edge so it doesn't overlap. And that way when you put the fabric around it, it's going to just come to the edge of the shoe and it won't look messy on the outside. Now, in my shoe video, I show you how to do several different types of shoes. In this one, what we're going to be doing is using that inner sole to cover up some ribbon that we're going to wrap around the foot. And to make the inner sole, I decided to use the same material as the dress material. And what I do is go around the inner sole about 1/4 of an inch out and make a line because we're going to have to fold this material around it. So you want to make a line about 1/4 of an inch outside of it to have enough fabric to fold over underneath the sole. And then I'm going to use some fabric fray liquid to seal this in so that it doesn't fray when we cut it. So we're going to have to cut some little grooves in it to make it fit around the curves of the shoe. So I put that around it, and keeping in mind that that does tend to leach in a little bit, so you want to make sure you don't get it too far over where it will show on the part that's going to be visible inside the shoe. So did that. As you can see, it does sort of spread out, so you just want to be careful how far you put that in. And then I'm trimming the other sole while I'm waiting for that to dry and making sure I have the right size. And once that's dry, then we can trim those out and start applying them to the cardboard. And that makes it a little bit stiff, not not really very stiff, but just a little bit, and that helps, I think, with forming the shoe when you're working with material like this. All right. And I think making shoes for these dolls is really hard because of that extreme arch that they have for the high heel. So it's not like making a regular shoe. I put a little glue around the outside and just kind of let that set for a minute so that it gets just a little bit more tacky. It makes it a whole lot easier when you're bending this fabric over because the fabric doesn't want to bend and wants to flip up. So if you already have this glue a little bit tacky, it makes it a little bit easier to hold it down. I think this is the hardest part of making shoes. I don't really enjoy this part. But you want to make these little V shapes so that the fabric won't bunch up underneath it. And then you just start folding it over a little bit at a time and holding it. And you want to try to avoid getting those little pointed areas around the outside where you fold it. That's really the hardest part, especially around the heel and the toe part where it's very curved. And once you get that dried, then we can apply it to the shoe. And I use these little metal tools because they don't stick to the glue as bad. And sometimes you can hold it down with those instead of your fingers. And sometimes I just have to sit there and hold it because they're so small. All right, so I've had those glued, and now I have that part which will be on the outside and looks nice. And just going to do another fitting to make sure when I glue it that it does fit exactly where I want it to fit, and that looks really nice. So I've also been gluing these little blue circles together. This is the same ribbon that we used on the sleeves, and this is going to be a bow that I'm going to put on the shoes. As you know, her traditional shoes are just basically yellow pumps, which are pretty boring with a bow. And so what I'm going to do is dress that up a little bit since we have strayed a little bit from the traditional characters costume. We can, I think, go ahead and stray a little bit more with the shoes as well. Plus, I just, I want to make something that's interesting for me. All right, so we see where the shoe is, and now what I'm having to do is measure around because I want this to slip, her toe to slip just into this. And this is just, you trial and error after I glue it down. It's not completely dry yet, so I can try it on and see if it's going to be big enough I mean, yeah, big enough for the foot to go in, but small enough to hold it, on the foot. So you have to just do some trial and error here to make sure that it fits, because we're going to put that inner sole on top of this to hide the ribbon, the bottom of the ribbon where it's glued down. So after I get that where I want it to be, then we're going to attach another ribbon. So there's the little blue ribbons glued down. And so the next part is we're going to take the red ribbon that we used in the sleeve, and that's going to be her ankle strap. And this one is also going to go under the inner sole of the shoe. So we're going to go ahead and glue it down to the polymer clay of the outer sole. So I cut off a couple of pieces that are long enough that it will wrap a couple times around her ankle and be able to tie a bow. And then I also use some glue on the ends so that it doesn't unravel after it's finished and you're tying bows and everything. We don't want it to look raggedy on the ends. So we're just putting a little strip of the E6000 across there where I'm going to put the strap. And like I said, I'm gluing the ends just to make sure they don't fray. And then we're going to let that dry just a little bit. And while we're doing that, we're going to finish the bow. I'm going to put a red ribbon around the center and tie that. And after we finish the shoe completely, then we'll attach the bow. All right, so the bows are done, we're ready. And now comes the part where we fit the inner sole to the outer sole. And this will cover up all that gluing work that we did with the ribbons. So I just want to place it in here and make sure that everything fits properly. And then I'm going to start by gluing the toe and then coming back in and gluing the heel. But I'm going to have to hold this with my fingers since it's such an odd shape. So I went and watched television for about an hour and just held these till they glued. And this is how they turned out. I think they're really cute. So now we can try them on, and I'm going to speed up the camera here while I'm tying this ribbon because it took me forever to tie a bow with this ribbon. I don't know why, but I just part of it was I was fighting the dress, so finally I had her use her hand to hold the dress up, and finally, after several tries, I got the ribbon tied. But I did that in fast motion, so you didn't have to struggle with me. All right. So once you get the ribbon tied, there's our completed shoe. And I think it's a very Snow White looking shoe, even though it's not the traditional yellow pump. I don't want to make, I don't like to just do the same thing. I want to make it my own. So I'm going to cut these red ribbons out because I tied those in a knot so it won't come loose. And I'm going to put a little dab of our trusty E6000 on the back of that, right at the red ribbon. And then we'll just pop it onto the toe of the shoe or the blue strap that goes across the toe. Very cute. All right. So there's our finished shoe. And now I'm going to take a couple of still pictures and let you look at it. Here's from the front with both shoes on. And then I took another picture that's from the side so you can see how those ribbons fit underneath the inner sole, and it looks really neat. And also I like that that sole matches the dress. So those are our shoes for Snow White. I hope you enjoyed it. Next up, we're going to probably finish her up in the next video. We're going to do her hair and a few final touches and hopefully get through all that in one video. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing, as always. Thank you and goodbye.